Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming my friend to the stage, the trailblazer, the man who made Miami the first African-American hotel on South Beach, my good friend Don Peebles.
Well, good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Andy for that kind introduction. Also, I want to recognize the good work that Andy has done. I mean, he embarked on a journey when he formed this organization to create more diversity within the hospitality industry, which definitely needs more diversity. And he's been a champion for African-American entrepreneurs all over the country. And it's not easy to put together a conference like this and to keep it going and to attract some of the most talented minds in the hospitality and development industry from around the country to come to Miami in late July of all times. And only Andy could do that. So let's give Andy a round of applause for the great work he's doing. Now, I just got here earlier this afternoon, so I don't know what was said about Norm Jenkins, but I want to say something about Norm Jenkins. Norm Jenkins was a champion for decades to provide economic opportunity in the hospitality industry for African Americans. He led the charge at Marriott to make sure that Marriott has led the industry every year since the NAACP has issued its report card as being the top grade winner in terms of diversity and economic opportunities for African Americans. And Norm, after leaving Marriott, I don't know how he could have topped what he had done, but he built the largest hotel in Washington, D.C., the Marriott Marquis Hotel. So Norm, I want to thank you very much for all you've done to create a better environment for me and all of us to do business. We heard from Mayor Francis Suarez, and Francis has left, but he is one of the most young and dynamic new mayors of the nation. Miami is an exciting global city, and he's going to take it to the next level, and he is one of the few father and son teams in politics where the son follows a great mayor and is an even greater mayor, and Francis is going to do some really great things. You all will hear much more about him in the years to come. Also, I want to just compliment Andy for being able to get so many New Yorkers here. I mean, this is incredible. I'm seeing people. I'm in New York a lot. By the way, not 183 days, but I'm in New York. So, and I spent a lot of time there, but not 183 days. But I've been trying to catch up with my lawyer and friend for weeks, and I see him right over here at the table next to me, Daryl Gay. And he's sitting next to Craig Livingston, who happens to be a phenomenal developer, but also chairman of the New York Real Estate Chamber, which is an organization of African-American real estate developers in New York City. And we want him to also come down here and bring his talents to South Beach like LeBron did and do many things down here. So New York is going to be here for a while. Now, I saw Steve Joyce, who was instrumental in helping me get my first Marriott property in Washington, D.C., the Courtyard by Marriott. And Steve told me he got the Chairman's Award, and he wondered what that meant. And I saw Raul Thomas earlier and getting the Deal of the Year award. And what did that mean? Did that mean that they were in the twilight of their careers? Was this a retirement or send-off? Well, I got Deal of the Year, and I got Chairman of the Year, and I'm still kicking. Now, I'd lost a lot of weight, so Andy probably thought I was in bad health, so he figured better honor me. But I think, Steve, we're safe here for the moment, and you are safe, and you got a lot of work ahead of you and what you're doing. And as you notice, he left D.C., so his suit's got a little lighter, a little more blue, and his shoes changed. Now, I can say that about Norm as well, but end of the day, now I've been spending more and more time in Beverly Hills too, because I'm building what hopefully will be the tallest building in the western United States in downtown LA. So I promised my wife every time I come back, she's going to get the same guy that left New York. I'm going to come back. But I may have dinner with Steve, so I can't be responsible for what happens next. So, by the way, I refer to my wife, and I want to say something also, is that I'm the person I am because of two people. My mother, who gave birth to me, raised me, and taught me the real estate business, by the way, as a black woman trying to break barriers in Detroit, Michigan, and Washington, D.C. And then my wife, Katrina, who made me a better person, because clearly when she met me, I was a work in progress. And so required a great deal of patience, nurturing, and support, including encouraging me to keep fighting to build the Royal Palm Hotel and all these other projects that we've done over the years. So thank you, Katrina. On my way over here, I was talking to a friend of mine, another lawyer. By the way, what happens, as you all know, when you're in the real estate and hotel business, you know a lot of lawyers. And it's a relationship-oriented business, right? So you become friends with some of these lawyers and so forth. I've been friends with a few of mine. And so I told one of my lawyers I'm coming over here again to speak and give a keynote at lunch, and wonder why they wanted me, because what could I possibly say to warrant giving the keynote address? I'm just a little run-of-the-mill developer. And so my friend told me actually I didn't deserve it, and I probably should just tell him to get somebody else who would have a better message. So it reminded me of this story of a developer who died. And this developer dies, and he reports to the pearly gates, and he's greeted by St. Peter. St. Peter checks his dossier, looks there, says, "Developer, your name's not on the list." Developer figured as much, so he reports to the gates of hell. And Satan welcomes him with open arms. "Come on in." So after about 2 or 3 months, the developer gets a bit uncomfortable with his surroundings. So he starts making some improvements. Pretty soon he's installed escalators, flushing toilets, air conditioning. So pretty soon the developer is a pretty popular guy down in hell. So one day, the phone rings, and Satan's sitting by the fireside, and the phone rings, and it's God. And God says to Satan, "How's it going down there in hell?" Satan says, "Actually not too bad. We got air conditioning, we got flushing toilets, we got escalators. Who knows what this developer is going to come up with next?" And God says, "You have a developer? You shouldn't have a developer. That's a mistake. Send him back up here immediately." And Satan says, "No way. I like having a developer on staff. In fact, I'm keeping him." And God said, "If you don't send him up here right this minute, I'm going to sue." And Satan starts laughing euphorically and says, "Oh, yeah? Well, where are you going to get the lawyers?" I'm sorry, Daryl. All right, so now give a little levity to the afternoon before we walk into some more of a serious topic. So, as I said, first of all, it's good to be back here in Miami, even with the heat in the end of July. Good news is I'll be gone by August. Not to New York, though. So I started doing business in 1996 in Miami. I moved my family here in 1997, and I built the nation's then first major hotel developed and owned by an African American. In 2003, I became chairman of the board of directors of the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. This is the organization that leads the tourism industry for Greater Miami and makes Greater Miami a destination globally. I was the first African American to head the organization. That same year, the NAACP held its national convention in Miami Beach. Miami hosting the NAACP for its national convention was seen as a watershed moment for Miami, illustrating the region's relationship with the NAACP had come full circle. What was the circle, you ask? I'll tell you about it, because my journey was a part of it. To put this transition in clear perspective, we need to step back in time. In June of 1990, anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela planned to visit Miami 4 months after being freed from prison in South Africa. The Miami city government made plans to present him with honors befitting his status as a global leader for freedom. The planned recognition included a key to the city and a proclamation. But during a television interview prior to his upcoming Miami visit, Mandela acknowledged the support he received as a political prisoner from then Cuba leader Fidel Castro. The Miami City Commission rescinded the official welcome to Mandela in retaliation. So black leaders were furious with this insult to Mandela and warned Miami commissioners that if Mandela did not receive the official welcome, African Americans would call for a boycott of Miami. So when the black community's appeals and threat were ignored, an organization of black leaders led by attorneys H.T. Smith and Marilyn Hollifield called for the threatened boycott immediately. Shortly thereafter, the National Bar Association, the ACLU, and other organizations canceled their Miami conventions. The NAACP joined the boycott, and many other organizations refused to hold meetings, conferences, or conventions in Miami. By the time the boycott ended on May 12, 1992, the city had lost over $100 million in revenue and had become an outcast among the nation's cities. The settlement of this boycott included the creation of single-member city and county commission districts, the creation of the Visitors Industry Council, and the creation of a scholarship program at Florida International University School of Hospitality Management for African American students from Miami-Dade County. There were many other concessions made by the city and county, one of them being the support of an African American owned hotel in Miami Beach. This is where my path pierced the circle I mentioned. The city of Miami Beach, along with Miami-Dade County, had already committed $70 million to support the development of a convention hotel in South Beach. And they now agreed to allocate $10 million of those funds to support the development of an African-American owned hotel. After an unsuccessful initial effort, the city issued a new request for proposals to develop the Royal Palm Hotel with majority African-American ownership. So I was a 36-year-old developer from Washington, D.C., married for 4 years and the father of a 2-year-old son. While in our vacation apartment on Miami Beach for a post-Christmas vacation, I read the Miami Herald Sunday edition. It was New Year's Eve, 1995. I read an article that mentioned the upcoming RFP, and I immediately called the broker who found our apartment for us and had him get a copy of the RFP the day it was issued, and to show me the adjacent property so I could go and acquire it. I put the adjacent property under contract and put together a team of diverse and talented professionals. I remember flying back on American Airlines from Miami back to DC and telling Katrina that we were going to respond to this RFP, we were going to win the RFP, and it was going to change our lives and change the trajectory of our company. But I wanted to do something transformational given the political backdrop, and subsequently submitted a proposal for a 100% African-American owned hotel, a feat never before accomplished. So here we all were on paper and teamed together to bid for ownership. And I'll talk a little bit more about ownership in a moment. After a very hard-fought battle, we won the RFP on the Royal Palm on June 6, 1996. The City Commission of Miami Beach voted to award us the opportunity to build the first black-owned hotel in the United States. On May 16th of 2002, the Royal Palm Hotel and Resort opened its doors. That was the first major hotel in the United States developed and owned 100% by African Americans. It was a day of great pride for the city, the community, Black America, my family, and for me. And to paraphrase the late Neil Armstrong, it was one small step for Miami, one giant leap for black entrepreneurship. This was 17 years ago, and great progress has been made in America since then. 6 years after the Royal Palm was opened, 40 blocks north on the same street, I hosted then Senator Barack Obama at another barrier-breaking project of mine, the Bath Club. The Bath Club is a resort I developed on the Atlantic Ocean on the grounds of a once racially segregated private beach club. In fact, I was the first African-American member to join that club. A few months after we hosted Obama, he became America's first African-American president. At that moment in time, I was never more optimistic America was finally turning the page on racial disparity and ending the obstruction of black progress. Progress locked down from 246 years of slavery and 142 years subsequent of second-class citizenship with limited to no economic opportunity. While slavery and legally imposed segregation was in our rear view, we continued the great struggle for economic equality. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once concluded, what does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger? And therein lies the challenge that we face in America today. African Americans claim only a fraction of the wealth of our white counterparts. In 2016, the median wealth for non-retired African Americans was $13,460. That's less than 1/10 of the median wealth of $142,000 for white Americans. This same year, black home ownership fell to a 50-year low of 42%, which is 31% lower than white home ownership, which reached 72% at the same time. Fast forward 2 years, and the black home ownership rate grew slightly to 44%, and white home ownership grew to 74%. This wealth disparity is directly reflective of home ownership and business ownership disparities that currently exist. Without money, we cannot buy homes or start businesses. In 1968, near the end of the civil rights movement, the median African-American family income was 57% of their white counterparts. In 2016, the ratio was 56%. Think about that. 50 years later, the disparity actually increased. Today, black-owned businesses represent approximately 2% of all U.S. businesses. This is essentially the same percentage of black hotel ownership. The pillars of democracy is equality. Black Americans represent 13% of our nation's population. Therefore, if opportunity is available on an equal basis, then the overall economic metrics should be reflective of the population demographics. Agreed? What are the biggest obstacles we confront in the pursuit of economic success? I was told a long time ago, in our capitalistic democracy, ownership is the essence of power. And I believe this to be true. Therefore, if black ownership is measured at less than 2%, which is just 15% of our population demographic, it serves to follow that we are essentially powerless when it comes to determining our future outcomes. However, America is a democracy, and our population, especially in major urban markets, is significant and often dominant. Working together, we have great political power. With these statistical challenges, you may ask, is there any hope? How do we change this? Here's the answer. We exercise our political power to ensure we invest in more black-owned businesses. We need black-owned businesses to reflect the population percentages. It is black-owned businesses who most often provide jobs, career, and contracting opportunities to other African-American businesses and entrepreneurs. Black-owned businesses are more likely to invest in our own communities. So what's the solution to significantly multiplying the number of black businesses and growing the existing black businesses that currently are operating today? The answer is very, very simple: capital. We all know that money is the fuel that powers the engines of business. And unfortunately, black businesses essentially have no access to investment capital to grow their businesses. Interesting study. Guidance Financial in 2018 did a survey of 2,600 black business owners, and it shows that over 80% said the number one challenge was access to capital. Recent studies have concluded that less than 0.2% of venture capital dollars go to businesses started by black women. Less than 0.2%. Black entrepreneurs are forced to rely upon their own resources to fund their businesses. In fact, 70% of those surveyed in that study used their own capital to start their companies, and 23% received investments from friends and families. Now, in my industry, the commercial real estate industry, there are only a handful of large-scale African-American developers nationally, and not many more small and mid-sized developers. And this is ironic because there are very few educational or technical skill barriers to enter into commercial real estate development. That's probably why I'm pretty good at it. So this can't be the reason. These barriers to entry educationally cannot be the reason. I want to give you some perspective on this. Two of the top New York City developers, one of them building the tallest residential building in New York City today. One started out as a taxi cab driver, another one as a wig salesman from his living room of his apartment. Three legendary Washington, D.C. developers who mentored me started their careers as a parking lot attendant, hotel busboy, and janitor. So real estate development is a low barrier to entry field. So why are there so few black or women developers? Capital and access to it. The same can be said regarding hotel ownership. As you all know, developing a hotel is a real estate action. Developers build hotels and hire operators to run them, operators like Hilton and Marriott and so many others. That's what most developers have done, and that's how most hotels get built. But without capital, it's impossible to do. But nothing gets built without having access to capital and the ability to raise equity. On larger developments, the equity comes from private equity firms. Development is a leveraged business, and it's rare for a large-scale development project for a developer to fund more than 20% of the project's equity. Say, for example, let's take a project that's $100 million. A $100 million project would be financed with 70% senior debt and $30 million of equity. The developer would contribute 10 to 20% of that equity, so $3 to $6 million to build a $100 million project. The other 80% or 90% of equity most often comes from private equity funds, generally owned and operated by Wall Street firms. Now, here's the hidden secret. The money contributed by Wall Street firms more often than not is not their own money. Think about that, not their own money. And I know there's some private equity funds in here as well, and I'm sure they would agree. It's generally the money from governmental, manufacturing, service worker, retirement pension funds, and other pension systems. So yes, it's the money of working men and women. A large percentage of pension contributors are black and brown people of color, and a larger percentage are women. Yet less than 0.1% of all private equity into the real estate market goes into projects developed and owned by African American developers. I mean, this is an alarming statistic, and it leads us to the key solution to closing the wealth and income disparities that African Americans confront. The solution is unlocking the money doors to deploy our own people's pension money into some of our own businesses. The time has never been better. African American voters are a powerful voting bloc, and as I stated earlier, often a strong majority who can often determine the outcome of elections. The nation has recently been more focused on economic equality, and the chairwoman of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee in charge of regulating the financial services industry is an African-American woman from California, Maxine Waters. And in Chairperson Waters' first press release as chairperson of the House Financial Services Committee, she indicated that the top of the agenda was providing access to capital for African American entrepreneurs. She did this same thing when she was in the state legislature, when she forced the California state pension systems to hire African American and minority and women investment advisors. So what's important here is we must now spread the word that we want access to capital. It's our money too, and we want our fair share of capital. We must educate our community and our entrepreneurs that there is a solution, and it's tangible. It's right there in our grasp. We must tell the politicians we want access to capital, and they must fight for it until they get it for us. And if they don't, we will vote in someone else who will. We must exercise our political might and make consequences, sort of like the boycott that was done here in Miami-Dade. It made its point and sent a message. So until we effectively get fairness, we've got to fight for it. We all must do our part in this fight for economic justice. We live in a democracy, so you all have a part. Contact your state and city controllers and treasurers and demand allocation of capital to black-owned businesses. Demand that the capital be deployed into the communities where the people who've earned it live. I guarantee you, if every participant paying into a workers' pension system knew that their money was being invested primarily by white men who give it to other white male-run companies, they would be outraged. It's their pension money and their communities, and they are empowered to demand where and how it's deployed. They just don't know. But now, we all know, and we must do our part and demand action from our political leaders. I'm doing my part. My company has a development project pipeline of over $4 billion from Boston to Florida to downtown Los Angeles, and we have made a firm commitment that 35% of all of our contracts will be with minority and women-owned businesses. As a black developer, I know firsthand the #1 obstacle to growing our business has been and continues to be access to capital. Therefore, my company is in the process of raising a private equity fund to support emerging developers, a fund whose sole purpose is to provide capital and hard-to-find equity to minority and women entrepreneurs. And by the way, while that is a good thing, this fund is not a philanthropic effort, but a great business model. The projects developed by minority and women-owned businesses in our major cities more often produce higher rates of return than the large deals developed by top-tier developers. So go ahead, you can clap because that's the truth. And of course, because the opportunities are so hard-fought, African Americans and women will do a better job because they know there is no second chance. Our fund will prove that providing capital to a diverse group of entrepreneurs reflective of our nation's population will produce superior returns. So it's up to all of us to close the economic divide. So as Barack Obama once said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. It is my honor to share some of my journey with you this afternoon in the hopes that it will inspire you to continue to actively endeavor for positive change. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.